No bonus for you this year. That was how she said it. No softening, no preamble, just 6 words spoken across a polished walnut desk in a corner office on the 32nd floor. The CFO didn't look up when she said it. She was sliding the last of the envelopes into a neat stack, white envelopes, each one with a name printed in the upper right corner. Mine wasn't in the stack. It had never been in the stack. The clock on her shelf read 4:30 p.m. I remember the exact time because I had been watching it since I sat down, watching the minute hand move while she finished her phone call with someone in legal, watching it because there was nothing else to look at that didn't make me feel like furniture. My name is Daniel Rhodes. I am 47 years old, and at that moment, I had been with the company for 19 years, 3 months, and 11 days. I knew the exact number because I had checked it that morning out of habit, the way you check the odometer on a car you've owned long enough to stop thinking about it. "It's a policy change," she said, finally looking up. Her expression was neutral, the kind of neutral you practice in front of a mirror. "Senior contributor roles fall under a different review cycle this year. Nothing personal. Nothing personal." I had heard that phrase before, but never in a room like this, never about something like this. Around me, the rest of the leadership team had already collected their envelopes. I had seen Marcus walk out with his half an hour earlier, smiling, already on his phone. I had seen Priya from finance, the new one, the one who joined 8 months ago, leave with hers 15 minutes after that. I had watched all of them pass through, and then I had been called in. Not to be handed an envelope, to be told there wasn't one for me. "We really do appreciate everything you've done," she continued, standing up. She extended her hand across the desk. "Your stability has been a real asset to this team." A handshake. That was what 19 years got me. Not a number, not even a zero, just a handshake and a phrase about stability, as if I were a piece of structural drywall they wanted to thank for not collapsing. I stood up. I shook her hand. I didn't say anything because nothing I could have said in that moment would have been the right thing. I had been in enough rooms like that to know the rule. When the decision has already been made, words don't change it. They only give the other person something to remember you by, and I didn't want to be remembered as the man who lost his composure in a corner office at 4:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. I walked out. I closed the door quietly behind me. The hallway was empty. Most of the floor had already left for the day, or were huddled in their offices opening their envelopes, comparing numbers in private messages, planning vacations they could suddenly afford. I walked past my own office without going in. I took the elevator down, crossed the lobby, crossed the parking garage, and sat in my car for a long time before I turned the key. The garage lights flickered above me, one of them buzzing the way it had been buzzing for 3 years, the same buzz I had reported twice and then stopped reporting because nothing ever changed. I wasn't angry. Not yet. What I was clear. Clearer than I had been in years. Because in 19 years of working there, I had never once been told no. Not because I never asked for things, but because I had stopped asking a long time ago. I had assumed that what was fair would come to me on its own, the way rain comes when the season turns. That assumption had just ended. I drove home that night the long way. Not because I wanted to think, but because I didn't want to arrive yet. My wife, Catherine, would be in the kitchen by now. My daughter, Emma, would be at the table doing her homework, or pretending to. If I walked through that door before I had something resembling a normal face, they would know. Catherine especially. She had been reading me for 22 years and she could spot a crack in my expression from across a room, so I drove. I took the route through the older part of town, past the diner we used to go to when Emma was small, past the hardware store that had closed 2 years ago and never been replaced. I drove slowly. I let the streetlights pass, and somewhere between the third red light and the fourth, I started to do the math. 19 years. I had joined the company at 28 as a junior systems coordinator, the kind of job you take when you're trying to prove you can be trusted with bigger ones. I had been trusted with bigger ones. Within 4 years, I was managing a team. Within 7, I was running the operations side of an entire division. By year 10, I had built the framework that the company still used to onboard every new client. That framework had my name nowhere on it. It just worked and people kept using it, and after a while everyone forgot it had ever been built by a person at all. That was the pattern. Build something, watch it become invisible, build the next thing. I had told myself for years that the invisibility was a sign of quality. Good infrastructure isn't supposed to be noticed. Good operations isn't supposed to be loud. You measure a man like me by what doesn't go wrong, and for 19 years, almost nothing had gone wrong. The problem with that kind of measurement is that it can't be put in an envelope. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the kitchen light was on. I could see Catherine moving past the window. I sat in the car for another minute and then I went inside. "You're late," she said when I came in, not accusing, just noticing. She was at the stove. Emma was at the table exactly as I had pictured her, except she was on her phone and the homework was untouched. "Long meeting," I said. I set my bag down. I went to the sink and washed my hands slowly, the way you do when you're trying to give yourself a few more seconds. "Did the bonuses come out today?" Catherine asked. She asked it lightly, casually, because over the years the bonus conversation had become a small ritual in our house, the way some families talk about Christmas. We didn't depend on the money, not really, but it was the marker. It was the thing that told us how the year had gone in numbers, in something you could hold. I turned off the faucet. I dried my hands. I looked at her and I thought about lying for half a second and then I didn't. "They came out," I said. "I didn't get one." She turned the burner down. She set the spoon she was holding on the spoon rest. She walked over to where I was standing at the sink, and she just looked at me, not surprised, not yet, just waiting for the rest. "They said it was a policy change," I said. "Senior contributor roles, different review cycle this year." I repeated the phrase the way the CFO had said it, and hearing it out loud in my own kitchen, in my own voice, made it sound even thinner than it had sounded in that office. Catherine didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she said, "How much did everyone else get?" It was, I realized, exactly the right question. The question I had not let myself ask in that office. The question that, once asked, could not be unasked. And I knew, standing there with the dish towel still in my hand, that the answer to it was going to change something between us, and between me and the company, and between me and the next 20 years of my life. "I don't know exactly," I said, "but I can guess." I told her what I had heard through the walls of that floor over the past 3 days. The murmurs in the hallway, the way Marcus had laughed when he walked out of the CFO's office, the kind of laugh you only let out when the number on the page has exceeded what you were expecting. I told her about Priya, 8 months in, walking past my office with an envelope tucked under her arm like it was a thing she had already gotten used to receiving. "My guess is 15% across the board for the senior leadership," I said. "Maybe 20 for the ones they want to keep. There's a retention clause in some of them now. Marcus said something about it last quarter at the holiday dinner." Catherine sat down at the table. Emma had looked up from her phone by then because she had heard enough to know that something was happening, but she was smart enough not to ask. She just watched. 15% of your salary," Catherine said slowly, "is a lot of money. I know what it is. And they gave you nothing. They gave me a handshake." I said it lightly because I didn't know how else to say it. Catherine didn't laugh. She didn't even smile. She just looked at the table for a long moment and then she looked back up at me. "Daniel," she said, "what are you going to do?" That was the question. That was the whole question, sitting on the kitchen table between us in front of a dinner that was getting cold. And I realized, sitting down across from her, that I didn't have an answer, not a real one. I had been driving home for almost an hour, and I had not, in all that driving, allowed myself to ask it. Because asking it would have meant admitting that the answer might not be the one I had always given. For 19 years, the answer to every hard moment at that company had been the same. Stay. Stay and fix it. Stay and outlast it. Stay because what you have built is worth more than what you would lose in the leaving. Stay because the next place might be worse. Stay because Emma was about to start university and the health insurance was good and the commute was tolerable, and the devil you know is, after all, the devil you know. But the devil I knew had just handed me a handshake. "I don't know yet," I said, and it was the most honest thing I had said all day. Catherine reached across the table. She put her hand over mine. She is not a dramatic woman. She has never been one to push me toward big decisions. She has, in fact, spent 22 years gently slowing me down, telling me to wait, to think, to not act in the heat of a thing. So when she squeezed my hand and said what she said next, I knew that something had shifted in her too. "You don't have to figure it out tonight," she said. "But Daniel, listen to me. You don't owe them anything anymore. Whatever you decide, decide it from that place. Not from gratitude, not from fear, from here." She tapped the back of my hand. "From who you actually are," I nodded. I didn't trust myself to say more than that. We ate dinner. Emma went back to her homework. The evening passed the way evenings pass, in small, ordinary motions that don't know anything about handshakes in corner offices. But after Catherine had gone to bed, I went down to the basement, to the desk where I keep my work laptop, and I opened it. I didn't open my company email. I opened LinkedIn. I hadn't logged in for almost 4 years. The site had changed. The interface was different. But the notifications were still there, and at the top of the unread pile was a message from someone named Hayden Cross, sent 11 days ago, with a subject line that read, "A conversation if you're open to it." I sat in the basement for a long time before I opened the message. The house was quiet above me. Catherine had gone to bed an hour earlier, and Emma had finally given up on her homework around 11. The only sound was the small electrical hum of the laptop, and the buzz of the fluorescent light over the workbench that I had been meaning to replace for 2 years. Hayden Cross. I knew the name. Of course I knew the name. He had been a senior project manager at our biggest competitor, a company called Larkin Industrial, for the past 6 years. Before that, he had worked at our company. He had reported to me briefly in what had been his first real leadership role. I had spent a winter walking him through the systems framework, the one I had built in year 10, the one no one ever credited me for. He had been a quick study, sharp without being aggressive about it. He had left for Larkin 3 years later, and we had stayed loosely in touch, the way men in the same industry stay in touch, which is to say not very, but enough. I opened the message. "Daniel, I hope this finds you well. I've been thinking about reaching out for a while, but the timing never seemed right. We're expanding the operations side of the business here at Larkin, and I keep running into the same thought, which is that almost every problem I'm trying to solve is one you've already solved at least once. I'd like to have a conversation. No agenda beyond that. No pressure. Just a conversation. If you're open to it, here's my direct line. Call any time." He had included his cell phone number, not his office line. His cell. I read the message 3 times. Then I read it a 4th time, looking for the part where it would turn into something less than what it appeared to be, the part where it would become a recruiter pitch, or a request for a favor, or one of those vague networking notes that people send when they want to seem proactive without committing to anything. The part wasn't there. The message was exactly what it said it was. A man I had once trained, who now ran a meaningful piece of a competitor's operation, telling me he wanted to talk. The message was 11 days old. 11 days ago, I had been deep in the final preparations for the quarterly review. I had not checked LinkedIn. I had not checked anything that wasn't directly related to closing the quarter cleanly. That was the kind of stretch I had stopped questioning years ago. Heads down, finish the work, come up for air when it's done. The quarter had closed 2 days ago. The bonuses had been distributed today. The handshake had been delivered. And the message had been sitting there the whole time. I thought about that for a while. I am not a man who believes in signs. I am not a man who believes that the universe arranges things in dramatic patterns to deliver lessons to individual people. I believe in coincidence, and I believe in the way the human brain finds shapes in random data. But I will say this. Sitting in that basement with that message open on my screen, on the same day that I had been told my work was worth a handshake, the coincidence felt heavy. I did not call him that night. I am not a man who calls anyone at midnight, and I am not a man who makes decisions on the same day that something has gone wrong. I have lived too long to do that. Decisions made on bad days have a way of carrying the bad day with them like a smell that gets into the upholstery. But I did one thing before I closed the laptop. I replied to the message. "Hayden, good to hear from you. I'm open to a conversation. Tomorrow afternoon work for you?" I sent it. I closed the laptop. I went upstairs. I slept 4 hours. He He replied at 6:42 the next morning. I saw the message on my phone before I had even gotten out of bed. Tomorrow afternoon works. 2 o'clock, I'll come to you. There's a coffee place on Bremer Street, the one with the green awning. Private booth in the back. See you there. I read it twice. He was driving to me, 40 minutes each way, on a Wednesday afternoon, for a conversation he had described as having no agenda. Men do not drive 40 minutes for conversations that have no agenda. Men drive 40 minutes when they have already decided what they want and are simply waiting to find out what it will cost. I got up. I went through the motions of the morning the way I always did. Coffee, shower, shave, the same blue shirt I wore on Wednesdays, the same charcoal slacks. Catherine was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs. She looked at me and I think she could see that something had moved overnight, but she didn't ask. She just poured me a cup and slid it across the counter. "You sleep," she said. "A little. You decide anything." I decided to have a conversation. She nodded. She didn't ask with whom. She knew that if I wanted her to know, I would tell her, and that if I didn't tell her, it was because I wasn't ready to say it out loud yet, even to her. That was one of the small graces of being married to Catherine. She knew the difference between a secret and a thing not yet spoken. I drove to the office. I parked in my usual spot. I rode the elevator to the 32nd floor. I walked past the CFO's office without looking at the door, and I went into my own office and I sat down at my desk, and for the first time in 19 years I did not open my email. Instead, I opened a blank document, and I started to write down in plain English everything I did, not my job description, the actual things, the processes I touched, the systems I owned, the relationships I maintained, the vendors who would only return calls if I was the one calling, the clients who had stayed because of conversations I had personally handled, the internal workarounds I had built that were not documented anywhere, because documentation would have made them official, and once they were official, someone would have tried to standardize them, and standardizing them would have broken them. I wrote for 2 hours. The document was 11 pages long when I stopped. I read it back and I had the strange experience of not quite recognizing the person it described, because that person on paper was not a senior director of operations. That person was something closer to a load-bearing wall. You don't notice a load-bearing wall until you try to take it out, and by then it's too late because the ceiling is already coming down. I saved the document. I named it Inventory. I did not save it to the company drive. I saved it to a personal cloud account that I had not opened in years. At noon, Jason Clark came by my office. He was the kind of man who walked into other people's offices without knocking because he believed the visit itself was the courtesy. He leaned in the doorway. "Daniel, you good for the client call at 3? I'll be there." "Great, just wanted to check in. Heard yesterday was a long one for some folks." He said it lightly. He was watching my face when he said it. He was not a stupid man. He knew exactly who had walked out of the CFO's office with what, and he knew that I had walked out with nothing. He was checking in the way he checked everything to see what shape I was in. I gave him the shape I wanted him to see. Calm, unbothered, exactly the same as yesterday. "It was fine," I said. "Nothing unusual." He nodded. He left. I left the office at 1:30. I told my assistant I had a personal appointment, which was true, and that I would be back by 4, which was also true. She didn't ask. I had not taken a personal appointment in the middle of a workday in so long that the request itself was strange enough to discourage follow-up questions. The coffee place on Bremer Street was the kind of place I would never have picked. It was small, the kind of small where you can hear every conversation, but Hayden had said there was a private booth in the back, and when I walked in, I saw what he meant. The back of the shop opened into a separate room with 3 booths and a door that could be closed. He was already there in the last booth, his back to the wall, 2 coffees on the table. He stood up when he saw me. He had not changed much. He had a little more gray at the temples than I remembered, and the suit was better than the suits he had worn when he worked for me, but the way he carried himself was the same. Direct without being aggressive, watchful without being suspicious. "Daniel." "Hayden." We shook hands. We sat down. He slid one of the coffees toward me. Black, no sugar, the way I had taken it for as long as he had known me. He had remembered. Small thing, but I noticed it. Thanks for coming, he said. Thanks for the drive. He smiled at that. He understood what I had observed. He didn't try to hide it. I want to be straight with you, he said. I told you in the message there was no agenda. That was true in the sense that I am not here to pitch you a specific job today. But I would be lying if I told you I wasn't hoping this conversation goes a particular direction. So I want to say that out loud because I respect you too much to do otherwise. I appreciate that. Larkin is restructuring its operations division. We are moving from a regional model to an integrated one. The person I have running it right now is good, but he is leaving in January for personal reasons, and we have not announced it. I have spent the last 4 months looking at who could replace him. Internally, externally, every direction. I keep coming back to the same person. He looked at me. He did not look away. He let the sentence sit. I am going to ask you a question, he said, and I am not asking it to put pressure on you. I am asking it because I want to understand where you are. Are you happy at Calder? Calder was my company. Calder Operations Group. He said the name the way you say the name of a competitor with a kind of professional neutrality, but I heard the question underneath it. I thought about how to answer. I thought about the handshake. I thought about Catherine's hand on mine at the kitchen table. I thought about the 11-page document on my personal cloud drive. I have been at Calder for 19 years, I said, and until yesterday I would have told you I was content. That is a different word than happy, and I think you know the difference. I know the difference. Yesterday the bonuses came out. Mine didn't. They told me it was a policy change. I am the only senior director who didn't receive one. He did not react. He did not look surprised or sympathetic or pleased. He absorbed the information the way a good operator absorbs information, which is to say he let it land and then he kept moving. Okay, he said. Then let me ask the next question. If I were to put together a serious offer, the kind of offer that reflects what I actually think you are worth, would you be willing to look at it? I held his eyes. I did not blink. Yes, I said. I would look at it. He nodded once, the way you nod when something has been settled, not celebrated. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out a folded piece of paper. Not a folder, not an envelope. A single piece of paper folded in thirds, the kind of thing a man carries when he wants the gesture to feel small but the contents to feel large. He slid it across the table. He did not unfold it. He let me do that. I unfolded the paper. It was a 1-page summary. Title at the top in plain font. Vice President of Integrated Operations, reporting directly to the Chief Operating Officer. Below that, a list of responsibilities about 6 lines long. Below that, a compensation summary. I read the compensation summary twice. I read it slowly, the way you read something when you want to be sure that the number on the page is the number you think it is, and not a number your brain has invented because it wants the number to be that. The number was the number. Base salary was a hair under 3 times what I was making at Calder. There was an annual performance bonus on top of that, structured against operational metrics, with a floor that was higher than my current total compensation. There was equity, vesting over 4 years. There was a signing bonus that, by itself, would have covered Emma's first 2 years of university without me touching a dollar of the rest. I did the math in my head. Total first-year compensation, conservative estimate, was close to 4 times what I was earning now. I set the paper down on the table. I picked up my coffee. I drank some of it. I set the cup down. I did all of this slowly because I wanted Hayden to see that I was not surprised, even though I was. The man across from me had not driven 40 minutes to make me a polite gesture. He had driven 40 minutes to make me an offer that was, by any honest measure, the largest financial event of my professional life. That is a serious number, I said. It is a serious role. Walk me through how you arrived at it. He nodded. He had been waiting for that question. It was the right question and he knew it. We did a market study, he said. We benchmarked against 3 peer companies. We did internal modeling on what the role contributes to revenue over a 4-year horizon. We then added a premium for the specific institutional knowledge we believe you carry, which we estimated conservatively. The number you are looking at is, in our internal language, the middle of the range we are authorized to offer. The high end of the range is approximately 12% above that. I am telling you that because I want you to know there is room, but I am also telling you that the middle of the range is, in my opinion, the fair number, and I would rather start with the fair number than play games." He paused. Then he added, "I will play games if you want me to, but I would rather not." I appreciated that. I appreciated it more than I let on. "What's the timeline?" "We would like an answer by the end of next week." Start date negotiable, but ideally within 60 days. I understand you would want to give a proper notice. I would expect nothing less. In fact, the way you handle your exit from Calder is one of the things we are paying for. I'm not interested in hearing a man who burns a building on the way out. I have never seen you do that, and I do not expect to see it now. You won't. I know. We sat for a moment. Two men in a back booth, with a folded piece of paper between us, and 19 years of one company's decisions resting on it like a paperweight. I drove back to the office at 3:40. I made the client call at 3 sharp by phone, from a quiet corner of the parking lot, with my headset on and the paper folded in my breast pocket. The call went the way client calls always went when I was the one running them. I had been running calls like that one for 15 years. I could have run it in my sleep. I almost did. When I got back to my desk at 4, I had 3 new emails from Jason Clark and a calendar invite from the CFO for the following Monday. The subject line of the calendar invite was "Quick Sync." I opened it. There was no agenda, just the time, the conference room, and the 2 attendees, her and me. I looked at the invite for a long time. I had been at Calder long enough to know what a quick sync with no agenda meant when it came from the CFO. It meant either that they had heard something, or that they were about to tell me something. The timing was strange. Less than 24 hours after the handshake. Less than 2 hours after I had taken a folded piece of paper from a man at a back booth on Bremer Street. I did not believe in coincidences, but I also did not believe that anyone at Calder yet knew about Hayden. The conversation had happened in a private room. I had told no one. Hayden was not the kind of man who leaked his own moves. The invite then was about something else. Something they had already been planning to tell me on their own timeline for their own reasons. I accepted the invite. I closed the laptop. I went home. That night at the kitchen table, after Emma had gone upstairs, I took the folded paper out of my breast pocket and I set it down in front of Catherine. I did not say anything. I just slid it across to her the way Hayden had slid it across to me. She unfolded it, she read it again, she set it down, she looked up at me. "Daniel, I know, this is real. It is real." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Tell me about the man." I told her. I told her about Hayden, who he was, who he had been when he worked for me, how he had moved through his career, what kind of operator he had become. I told her about the way he had set the paper down. I told her about the way he had described the number, not as an offer, but as the middle of a range. I told her about the part where he had said he would rather not play games. Catherine listened. She has always been a good listener, in the technical sense, which is to say she does not interrupt and she does not start formulating her response while the other person is still talking. When I was done, she sat with it for a minute, and then she said something I will remember for the rest of my life. "Daniel," she said, "I want you to take that paper and put it somewhere safe tonight. Not because I have decided what you should do. I haven't. But because for the first time in 19 years, you are holding a piece of paper that tells you what someone other than Calder thinks you are worth. And whatever happens next, I do not want you to ever forget what that number is. Even if you say no, even if you stay, I want you to carry that number with you for the rest of your career, so that no one in any room ever convinces you again that you are worth less than that." I nodded. I could not speak right away. So I just folded the paper back into thirds and put it in the drawer of the small desk by the window, the one where we kept the bills. Then I sat back down and I told her about the calendar invite from the CFO. The quick sync was at 10 the next Monday. I spent the weekend the way I spent most weekends, which is to say, I did not let the situation occupy more space in my house than it had a right to. I mowed the lawn on Saturday. I drove Emma to her Sunday afternoon study group. I went to the hardware store and finally bought the fluorescent tube to replace the buzzing one in the basement. I installed it. The buzz stopped. The basement was, for the first time in 2 years, quiet. But I also did one other thing that weekend. On Sunday night, after Catherine and Emma had gone to bed, I went down to the now quiet basement and I drafted a letter. Not a resignation letter. A letter to myself. A letter that listed in order every reason I had to stay at Calder and every reason I had to leave. I wrote it in plain language with no flourishes because I was not trying to convince anyone of anything. I was trying to look at the thing clearly. When I was done, the stay column had 4 items on it. The leave column had 11. I read them both several times. I did not edit them. I closed the document and went to bed. Monday morning, I dressed the way I always dressed. I rode the elevator to the 32nd floor at 9:47. I poured a cup of coffee from the kitchenette. I walked to the conference room at 9:58. The CFO was already there. She stood up when I came in, which was unusual. She closed the door behind me, which was more unusual. "Daniel, thanks for making time. Sit down." I sat down. She sat down across from me. There was no paper between us. No folder, no envelope, no laptop, just the table. "I want to talk about last week," she said. I waited. "I have been thinking about how that conversation went, and I have been thinking about you, and I want to be honest about something. The decision on the bonus was made by committee. I delivered it. I stand behind the framework. But I want you to know that I argued against it for you specifically, and I lost that argument, and I have been uncomfortable about it since the meeting ended." I said nothing. I watched her. "I have been authorized," she continued, "to revisit your compensation outside the normal cycle. I would like to discuss a path forward. There is room for a meaningful adjustment to your base. There is room to bring you into the equity pool for the first time. There is room, if we move quickly, to have all of this in place by the end of the quarter." I let her finish. I let the silence sit for a moment after she finished because I wanted her to feel the silence the way I had felt the silence on the other side of her desk a week ago. "Can I ask a question?" I said. "Of course." "What changed between Tuesday afternoon and this morning?" She held my eyes. To her credit, she did not look away. "Some additional information has come to my attention," she said carefully, "about the scope of what you actually own. I do not think the committee fully understood it when they made their decision. How did the additional information come to your attention?" She did not answer right away. Then she said, "Jason Clark spent the weekend trying to find documentation for the client onboarding framework. He could not find it. He came to me this morning. We had a long conversation. He told me in his own words that he did not understand until this weekend how much of the operational infrastructure runs through you and is not documented anywhere else." I nodded slowly. I did not smile, but inside I felt something settle that had been unsettled for a long time. "I appreciate you telling me that," I said. "I would like to think about your offer. I will give you an answer by Friday." I called Hayden on Tuesday morning. I called him from my car in the same parking lot where I had taken the client call the week before. I told him I was going to accept his offer. I told him I would need until Friday to give formal notice at Calder, and that I would need 60 days to transition cleanly. He said that was exactly what he had hoped to hear. He did not gloat. He did not push for a faster start. He thanked me for the call and told me he would have the formal paperwork to my personal email by end of day. On Friday, I walked into the CFO's office at 4:30 in the afternoon. I picked the time deliberately, same time of day as the handshake, same corner office, same chair on the opposite side of the desk. I told her I was leaving. I told her I had accepted a position at Larkin Industrial. I did not tell her the number. I did not need to. Her face shifted in a way I had not seen it shift before, and I understood then that she had assumed her offer would be enough, and that the assumption had just collapsed in front of her. "Daniel," she said, "what would it take to keep you?" "Nothing," I said. "There is no number anymore. The number was the conversation we did not have last Tuesday. It is not a conversation you can have twice." She accepted that. To her credit, she did not try to negotiate. She asked about the transition. I told her 60 days, fully documented, every framework written down, every vendor contact transferred, every workaround surfaced and either formalized or eliminated. She asked if I would be willing to train my replacement. I said I would on the condition that they were hired within 30 days. She agreed. I gave her my letter. I shook her hand. I walked out. The 60 days were the cleanest 60 days of my career. I wrote everything down. I introduced people to people. I sat in meetings I had been quietly avoiding for years, and I named out loud the things I had been doing in the background. Some of the people in those meetings looked surprised. Some of them looked uncomfortable. A few of them, the ones who had known all along, looked relieved that someone had finally said it. Jason Clark came to my office on my last day. He stood in the doorway, the same way he always had, but he did not lean. He stood up straight. "Daniel," he said, "I want to apologize." "For what?" "For not understanding sooner." I looked at him for a moment. He was a younger man than I was. He had a long career ahead of him. He had made a real mistake, and he was making the real, harder choice of nomming it instead of letting it pass. "Apology accepted," I said. "Do me one favor. Anything. At the next place you work, find the person who is holding the building up. Find them early. Pay them what they are worth before they have to ask." He nodded. He shook my hand. He left. I walked out of Calder for the last time at 5:15 on a Friday in October. I drove home the short way. Catherine was on the porch when I pulled in. She had a glass of wine in her hand and a second one on the railing. Emma was inside. I started at Larkin the following Monday. The work was familiar in the way that all real work is familiar, which is to say the problems were new but the shape of solving them was the same. The first paycheck arrived 2 weeks later. I looked at the number. I thought about the folded paper in the drawer by the window. I thought about Catherine's hand on mine at the kitchen table. It was, by every measure I had, the best choice I ever made. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Tell me in the comments about the moment you realized your work was worth more than they were paying you. I read every one.